Wings Over the Rockies Air and Space Museum presents The Last Mission.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special news bulletin. The Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor, Hawaii by air, President Roosevelt has just announced.
The Pearl Harbor event triggered a lot of things in America at that time. I didn't even know it happened on that Sunday afternoon. You can't imagine that with the news like it is today, but the family was out Sunday afternoon on a picnic. We got back home and the principal of the school called and wanted to know if I had a radio that I could bring to school on Monday. And I told him, yeah, I've got one. It's got a pretty good-sized speaker on it. What's the deal? And he told me the Japs had attacked Pearl Harbor and that Roosevelt was going to make a speech Monday morning, and he wanted the whole school to be able to hear it.
I ask that the Congress declare that since the unprovoked and dastardly attack by Japan on Sunday, December 7th, 1941, a state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire.
And from that speech, which was even to a bunch of kids in school at that age, that was an inspiring speech and a meaningful speech. We realized that our life would probably never be the same again. Here I am, 89 years old, and when I look back on my life, the outstanding experience, the thing that is burned into my memory, is World War II. And I was starting right then. I was in the 11th grade then, and I certainly, my parents had instilled in me the importance of school. I wanted to finish high school, but I didn't want to miss the war. But I wanted to fly since I was 6 years old, and I wanted to be in the Air Corps. When I entered high school, we moved to Pine Bluff, Arkansas, so I did my senior year at Pine Bluff, Arkansas, and the U.S. Army Air Corps, which was the Air Corps then, it wasn't a separate branch of service, it was a part of the Army, came up with a plan where if you enlisted in the Air Corps while you were in the last half of your senior year of high school, they wouldn't take you until you graduated. So man, I was the first guy in line. However, during my senior year of high school, I had some wonderful experiences while I was waiting, because other than flying, my main love was music. And in those days, the music was big band music, and you couldn't get 2 or 3 guys on a PA system together and have a band. It took a large group, so we had the opportunity to play the kind of music we loved and get paid for it.
After leaving high school in Pine Bluff, it was on to Miami Beach for basic training. Then to Butler University in Indianapolis as he worked towards his goal of becoming a pilot. That all changed when he arrived in San Antonio for flight training.
And so there were make-busy activities, as the Army is famous for. But one of them was the squadron organized a track team. And I'd never done anything like that before. I thought that'd be a good thing to try to do. I could run, and I'd try it out and made the high jump team. And in the first competition, I jumped over the bar into the sawdust pit and hit a piece of 2x4 that was in there by mistake, and my right leg bent 90 degrees the wrong direction. and I wound up 30 days in the hospital there and washed out of pilot training. When they discharged me from the hospital and were processing me to see what to do with me, literally, because they had stamped me as not qualified for pilot training, I asked the guy, "What do you got?" And he said, "Well, we're looking for radio operators, aircrew radio operators." I said, "You mean they're going to let me be on an air? They won't let me have pilot training, but they'll let me be a member of the aircrew." "Yeah, you can do that." But it was a great fit, because my dad had been an amateur radio operator ever since I could remember. I had access to his radio equipment. He had taught me a lot about it, and I loved it. So, okay, if you can't be the pilot, being the radio operator sounded all right.
Now a radio operator, Clyde went on to Kansas, where he first set his eyes on the B-29.
So I was shipped along with our crew, the crew that was put together to be the crew of a B-29, were shipped to, I think it was Harrington, Kansas, where we were to receive some ground training and learn about the B-29. And you got to keep in mind, this was barely 40 years after the Wright brothers' first flight. And here was an airplane that had been designed and put in production in record time. We were told one day at Harrington, our crew, go out on the ramp out there, your B-29 sitting out there, they gave us a tail number on it, and get in it and go. And there was of course there was a instructor pilot that was going along too. So we started walking out there, cold wind blowing out of the north. It was a cold day, and when we turned the corner around the hangar and saw that B-29 sitting over there, I believe it was the most beautiful sight I've ever seen. It was all silver. It was huge. It looked like, to me, it had all been made in a mold. Everything just, the wings flowed into the fuselage flowed into the tail assembly, and we were just awed. Night mission, all weather, special B-29. When you had an emergency, I was the go-to guy to contact Air Sea Rescue to make all the communications connections possible so people would know where we were, what condition we were in. Remember what your alternatives are if you got trouble on a night mission over Japan. Your alternative is a midnight snack for the sharks.
While the crew began training missions on their B-29, they wondered just how high could a B-29 fly. They found out.
And so coming back, it's all done. Some guy says, "I wonder how high this thing will really go." And the pilot, who was an adventurous guy, said, "I don't know, let's find out." So he started a slow climb, and he got to a little over 50,000 feet, as I remember it. We didn't know if anybody had ever been at 50,000 feet before. When he got there, however, we knew it because all 4 engines quit. They need air. And that was, well, in this case, carburetor icing got them too. And that woke us up. We wondered if it was worth trying to find out how high this thing would go. But 50,000 feet is a lot of room. So the pilots did what they should have done, put it in a slow glide. We got back down to warmer temperatures, and they were able to start all 4 of the engines again. And we went on back to base, resolved not to tell anybody about that incident.
Training completed, Clyde and his crew joined the war in the Pacific, flying missions from Guam to Japan.
I think if there was an outstanding, tangible emotion, it would have been joy. We were actually going to get to do it. We were confident. Well, heck, we were 19 years old. You're confident and you're indestructible, so you don't worry about dying, and you don't worry about doing your job because the training took care of that. We were happy. We were happy.
Taking off in a fully loaded B-29 with a full load of bombs was a challenge under the best of circumstances. But taking off from Guam added an extra element to the mix.
Now, you're most vulnerable to problems during the takeoff, and particularly if you've got 20,000 pounds of dynamite and 6,500 gallons of fuel on board, takeoff is pretty critical. The runway at Guam, because of just the geography of Guam Island, the end of the runway terminated and there was a 500-foot cliff down to the water. But that 500-foot cliff was a lifesaver because with a B-29 loaded like that, the takeoff procedure after you checked your engines and all that kind of thing, hold the brakes as hard as you could, put the throttles all the way forward, get the engines winding up just before they fly apart, let go of the brakes, and pull the gear up when the cliff is behind you. They use up 200 or 300 feet of that 500 feet. And had it not been there, we couldn't have carried the bomb loads that we did. It was an exciting procedure. Well, the way the mission worked from Guam, these were night missions, but of course we took off usually mid-afternoon, about 3 o'clock, because it was going to be night by the time we got to Japan. And the airplanes were lined up along the taxiways in all directions to get a position on the runway for takeoff. And if everything worked right, they were able to take off about 1 minute apart. Obviously you didn't fly formation at night because you wouldn't have been able to see the other airplanes in the formation. So we flew trail. The first airplane, minute later the second airplane, a minute later the third airplane. 6 or 7 hours to Japan, 30 minutes time you get established on the bomb run until you can break loose. A lot of the guys said, the cliche, there's 7 hours of boredom for 30 minutes of sheer terror. The truth of the matter is, I don't remember feeling any terror during that part of the mission. The terror that I felt, if I ever felt anything you'd honestly be able to call terror, was when we got back to Guam and I could sit there and think about what might have happened. But while it's happening, fortunately, you just don't think that way. A major part of it, the oldest guy on our crew was 25 years old. And at that age, you are indestructible. You can imagine all these other people getting blown up and all that kind of thing, but it's not going to happen to me.
In August, we made a test that never was applied to Germany. While great land, sea, and air forces gathered for the last invasion, our B-29s dropped 2 atomic bombs.
We got the news much later, scuttlebutt, and we didn't know what an atom was. We heard somebody called it an atom bomb, and we said, gee, what's that? But we knew that something had been dropped on Hiroshima and done considerable damage. Just coincidentally, we flew a night bombing mission to Japan on the 6th of August. And on the way out, we encountered 3 B-29s coming back. We had, the geography was Guam, Saipan, Tinian, and then on to Japan. Well, we were somewhere before Iwo Jima and saw 3 airplanes. And we'd never seen another B-29 when we were flying a mission, and here were 3 of them in formation heading the opposite direction. As it turned out later, that was the Enola Gay, Bockscar, and the great artiste who had, well, you know, Enola Gay had dropped the bomb, and the other 2, one of them had been an observation and one of them been a weather. But we didn't know that for a long time, but it was an interesting piece of history coincidence.
The crew safely completed 13 missions to and from Japan. On August 14, 1945, they flew mission number 14. They didn't know it at the time, but this would be the last mission.
There were rumors that the war was going to be over, and there were rumors that these atom bombs, which we didn't know what that meant, had something to do with it. And we were somewhat surprised when on the 14th of August, we were briefed for a mission, the longest mission ever flown from the Marianas Islands to an oil refinery on the western coast of the northern island of Japan. It was, I can't think of the name of the city, but it was, Akita was the area of Japan. So we got in line. Now, there's 140 some odd airplanes that were in line to go on this mission, and at a minute apart, that's over 2 hours, right? So it's a long time. The process of taking off on a mission like that is a long process. And we were somewhere probably close to the middle of the line. We pretty well knew this was going to be the last mission. We didn't want to miss it. I mean, after all, this is the real end of the war. And lo and behold, when we started our mag checks, one of the engines didn't make it. So we had to turn around, head back past all these other airplanes back to our hard stand, let the mechanics see what they could do about it. They did what they normally do, and it works well. They remove the spark plugs and clean them, and not all of them, just they know which ones. And when we got back in line, we were at the tail end of the line, but we were going to go. We were still lined up to go. So it was around 6 o'clock when we took off on that last mission. Now that sounds strange when you say it 65, 70 years later. We were getting to go, but we did not want to miss that. The target was well lit up by the time we got there because 100 and some odd airplanes in front of us had dumped their bombs on it. So we had no trouble finding the target, unloading our bombs, and headed for the coast, as was the procedure, and headed back to Guam. And we were all speculating about whether that was going to be the last one or not, what the deal might be. And
while that stream of bombers, including the horrible monster, was en route to that oil refinery, something else was going on in Tokyo. The Emperor of Japan had already recorded his surrender announcement for delivery over the radio. But fanatics in the military attempted a palace coup to prevent the surrender announcement. They were determined to die rather than surrender and take all their countrymen with them. When that stream of B-29s passed by headed north, Tokyo went into an air raid blackout. The resulting confusion and the already weak support by other military in the coup, who quickly bailed, brought an end to it all. The surrender broadcast was played. The war had ended. It was over.
the speculation is, and it's easy to make this speculation, Had it not been for that air raid and the blackout, the coup could have succeeded, the war could have gone on. We were already prepared to invade Japan. Millions of both Japanese and Allied forces would have died, and the end would have been who knows what, horrible. So I don't like to say we take credit for it, but we think we were a part of bringing the war to an end to at least as great an extent as the atomic bombs were. And troops from Manchuria were headed towards Japan because Russia obviously wanted to be a part of the peace negotiations because they had their eyes on some islands in that part of the world that they really wanted. And the thinking was, by some, that they were going to take this operating oil refinery, and that was going to be their claim on Japan, and we destroyed that, and in so doing probably committed the first act of the Cold War. Our part in history, while not very well known, we think was pretty significant. Somewhere around noon of the 15th of August, and little did we know at that time, when we crossed over Iwo Jima, the sailor in Times Square was probably already kissing that nurse. I wrote in my logbook, "War's over, I'm going to sleep." And I did. And, you know, again, that's part of this crew thing. My job was done. These other guys knew what they were doing. If that airplane could get back to Guam, they'd get it back. I went to sleep. And I didn't wake up until we landed on Guam, and it wasn't the landing that woke me up, it was the engine sputtering from lack of fuel as we taxied to our hard stand. But as it turned out, we went to the briefing. The intelligence officer said, "Well, you've flown the last mission," because the Emperor made his surrender speech today. I was thinking of what a lucky guy I was, and saying a prayer, not so silent, of thanks for me being there on the ground upright without a single scratch. Nobody in our crew had a scratch.